The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, adjusted her simple navy coat one final time. She stood before the mirror in her private study, not preparing for a grand state occasion or a glamorous gala, but for something far more meaningful. Today would mark the beginning of what many would later describe as one of the most touching chapters in modern royal history. Prince William entered the room quietly, his expression thoughtful as he reviewed the schedule on his phone. The couple had been planning this series of visits for months, working closely with their private secretary and the palace communications team to ensure everything would proceed smoothly. What they hadn't anticipated was how profoundly these seemingly simple encounters would resonate with people across the United Kingdom and beyond. The idea had emerged from a conversation they'd had during a quiet evening at Adelaide Cottage several weeks earlier. Their 3 children were tucked safely in bed, and the couple found themselves discussing the weight of their royal duties and the desire to make a genuine difference in people's lives. Catherine had been reading letters from the public, many of which spoke of loneliness, struggle, and the small acts of kindness that had helped people through difficult times. "Sometimes I wonder if we're really connecting with people," Catherine had said, her voice soft as she looked up from a particularly moving letter from an elderly woman in Yorkshire. "All these formal events and ceremonies are important, but are we actually touching lives in a meaningful way?" William had nodded, understanding exactly what his wife meant. Their royal roles came with incredible privilege and responsibility, but also with a certain distance from the everyday experiences of ordinary citizens. They attended charity galas and ribbon-cutting ceremonies, met with dignitaries and heads of state, but the moments of genuine human connection often felt fleeting. "What if we did something different?" William had suggested, moving to sit beside Catherine on their comfortable sofa. "Something smaller, more personal. No cameras, no formal protocols, just as being present with people who could use a bit of support." The conversation had continued late into the evening, with both of them becoming increasingly excited about the possibility of creating a more intimate way to serve their community. They discussed visiting care homes, children's hospitals, and community centers, but not for official engagements with press coverage and formal presentations. Instead, they wanted to simply show up and spend time with people listening to their stories and offering whatever comfort they could provide. Their private secretary had initially expressed some concern about the logistics and security implications of such informal visits. The royal family's schedule was typically planned months in advance, with every detail carefully coordinated. The idea of impromptu visits to various locations would require significant adjustments to their usual protocols. However, when William and Catherine explained their vision, the palace staff began to understand the potential impact of such an approach. They worked together to develop a plan that would allow for spontaneous visits while still maintaining appropriate security measures. A small, discreet team would accompany them, but the emphasis would be on creating genuine moments of connection rather than photo opportunities. The first location they had chosen was a care home in Windsor, just a short drive from their residence. Meadowbrook Care Home housed 45 elderly residents, many of whom rarely receive visitors. The facility's director, Mrs. Sarah Thompson, had been contacted by the palace with a simple request. Would it be possible for the Prince and Princess of Wales to visit informally, without fanfare, to spend time with the residents? Mrs. Thompson had initially thought the call was a prank. Royal visits to care homes typically involved months of preparation, extensive security sweeps, and carefully orchestrated activities. The idea that 2 of the most recognizable people in the world wanted to simply drop by for a chat seemed almost impossible to believe. But as the details were confirmed and the arrangements began to take shape, Mrs. Thompson found herself both excited and nervous about the prospect. She had worked in elderly care for over 20 years and understood better than most how much such a visit could mean to her residents. Many of them had lived through decades of British history, had watched the royal family grow and change, and maintained a deep affection for the monarchy despite the various challenges and controversies that had emerged over the years. As Catherine finished her preparations that morning, she thought about the residents she was about to meet. She had requested brief background information about some of them, not for formal talking points, but simply to better understand their lives and experiences. There was Albert Morrison, a 92-year-old former railway worker who had served in the Royal Navy during his youth. Margaret Whitfield, 87, had been a school teacher for 40 years and had raised 5 children as a single mother after her husband's death in a mining accident. Each person had a story, a lifetime of experiences that had brought them to this point. Catherine felt a familiar nervousness in her stomach, the same feeling she experienced before any important engagement. But this nervousness was different from what she felt before formal ceremonies or state occasions. This was the anxiety of wanting to do something meaningful, of hoping to bring genuine comfort and joy to people who deserved both in abundance. William joined her as they made their way to the car, his own thoughts clearly focused on the day ahead. Over the years of their marriage and their time as working royals, they had developed an almost intuitive understanding of each other's moods and motivations. He could see the mixture of excitement and apprehension in Catherine's expression, feelings that perfectly matched his own. The drive to Meadowbrook Care Home took only 15 minutes, but it felt both too long and too short. They traveled in a modest vehicle with minimal security presence, having specifically requested that their arrival be as low-key as possible. No road closures, no police escorts, no crowds of well-wishers gathered behind barriers. Just 2 people arriving to spend time with others who could benefit from their company. As they pulled into the car park of the care home, Catherine noticed several staff members peering out of windows, their faces bright with anticipation. Mrs. Thompson stood near the main entrance, clearly nervous but trying to maintain her professional composure. The building itself was modest but well-maintained, with colorful flower boxes adorning the windows and a small garden visible to one side. William and Catherine exchanged a look before stepping out of the car. There were no red carpets or formal greetings, just Mrs. Thompson approaching with a warm smile and slightly trembling hands. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said, offering a small curtsy. "Thank you so much for coming. Our residents are absolutely thrilled." Catherine smiled warmly, immediately putting the director at ease. "Thank you for having us. We're very much looking forward to meeting everyone." As they entered the building, the couple was struck by the homey atmosphere that Mrs. Thompson and her staff had created. The walls were decorated with photographs of residents and their families, artwork created in craft sessions, and memorabilia from local events and celebrations. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the aroma of lunch being prepared in the kitchen, creating an environment that felt genuinely welcoming rather than institutional. The main lounge area buzzed with quiet excitement as residents who were able had gathered in their favorite chairs and sofas. Some sat in wheelchairs, others used walking aids, but all shared expressions of eager anticipation. Several staff members moved quietly around a room, ensuring everyone was comfortable and had everything they needed. Mrs. Thompson led William and Catherine into the room, and for a moment there was complete silence. The residents stared in apparent disbelief that these 2 familiar faces from television and newspapers were actually standing in their lounge, dressed casually and smiling warmly at each of them. Then Albert Morrison, the former railway worker, broke the silence with a chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his voice carrying a hint of his Yorkshire accent. "Begging your pardon, Your Highnesses, but I never thought I'd see the day." The tension in the room immediately dissolved as laughter rippled through the group. Catherine moved toward Albert's chair, extending her hand with a genuine smile. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Morrison. I understand you worked on the railways for many years." Albert's weathered face lit up as he shook her hand. 43 years, Your Highness. Started as a cleaner when I was 16, worked my way up to signalman. Best job in the world. It was even in all weather." William approached a group of women seated near the window, where Margaret Whitfield sat with her knitting in her lap. She looked up at him with bright eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor despite her advanced age. "Mrs. Whitfield, I believe," William said, taking a seat in an empty chair beside her. "I heard you were a teacher. What subject did you teach?" Margaret smiled, setting down her knitting needles. "Everything, Your Highness. In a small village school, you teach whatever needs teaching. Reading, arithmetic, history, even a bit of music when the regular teacher was ill." As the couple moved through the room, spending time with each resident who was present, something remarkable began to happen. The formal atmosphere that might have been expected at such an encounter gradually transformed into something much more natural and comfortable. William found himself engaged in an animated discussion about football with a retired mechanic named Frank, while Catherine listened intently as a former seamstress named Dorothy shared stories about making wedding dresses for local brides in the 1960s. The staff members watched in amazement as their residents, many of whom had become increasingly withdrawn in recent months, began to open up and share stories they hadn't told in years. There was something about the genuine interest and warmth displayed by the royal couple that seemed to unlock memories and emotions that had been dormant for too long. Mrs. Thompson observed from a discreet distance, taking notes not for any official report, but simply to remember this extraordinary day. She had hosted numerous visits from local dignitaries and charity representatives over the years, but she had never witnessed anything quite like this. The prince and princess weren't just fulfilling an obligation or checking items off a royal agenda. They were genuinely present, fully engaged with each person they met. Catherine found herself sitting beside Rose Patterson, an 89-year-old former nurse who had worked in London hospitals during some of the most challenging periods of the National Health Service's history. Rose's hands showed the effects of arthritis, but her mind remained sharp and her stories were compelling. "I remember when the NHS was just getting started," Rose was saying, her voice soft but clear. "Such hope we had then, such belief that we could provide good care for everyone, regardless of their circumstances. It wasn't always easy, mind you, but we knew we were part of something important." Catherine listened intently, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated her genuine interest in Rose's experiences. "It must have been incredibly challenging work," she said. "What kept you motivated during the most difficult times?" Rose smiled, her eyes distant as she recalled those years. "The patience, of course. Seeing someone recover, watching a family reunion in a hospital room, helping to bring new life into the world. Those moments made everything worthwhile." Meanwhile, William had settled into a corner with three gentlemen who were eager to discuss their memories of national service and their views on current events. Despite the significant age difference, he found their perspectives fascinating and their stories deeply moving. These men had lived through tremendous changes in British society, had witnessed the transformation of their country from a war-torn nation to a modern democracy, and their insights were both enlightening and humbling. The morning stretched into early afternoon without anyone seeming to notice the passage of time. Lunch was served in the dining room, and rather than departing as originally planned, William and Catherine asked if they might stay and join the residents for their meal. Mrs. Thompson quickly arranged for 2 additional place settings, and soon the royal couple found themselves enjoying shepherd's pie and vegetables while continuing their conversations with their new friends. The dining room buzzed with animated chatter as residents who rarely spoke during meals found themselves sharing stories and jokes with their famous visitors. Catherine helped an elderly woman named Betty cut her food, while William listened patiently as Harold, a former postman, explained his theory about the best routes for mail delivery in rural areas. After lunch, several residents requested a tour of the garden, and despite the autumn chill, a small group made their way outside. The garden was modest but lovingly maintained, with raised flower beds that allowed wheelchair-bound residents to tend plants and vegetables. Catherine knelt beside one of the beds, admiring the late-season chrysanthemums while listening to Arthur explain his techniques for extending the growing season. "The secret is protection from the wind," Arthur was saying, pointing to a strategically placed screen. "These old flowers can handle a bit of cold, but the wind will finish them off every time." William found himself helping to harvest the last of the season's tomatoes, working alongside residents who took evident pride in their gardening efforts. The sight of the future king carefully placing ripe tomatoes in a basket while chatting about soil preparation with a group of elderly gardeners created a scene that would have been remarkable if anyone had been there to photograph it. But that was precisely the point of this visit. There were no cameras, no official documentation, just genuine human connection happening in a garden behind a care home on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that this visit had evolved into something far more significant than anyone had anticipated. What had been planned as a brief, informal call had become an extended afternoon of meaningful interaction that was benefiting everyone involved. The residents were more animated and engaged than many of them had been in months, while William and Catherine found themselves energized by the authentic connections they were forming. Mrs. Thompson watched with growing amazement as she witnessed her residents transform before her eyes. Margaret Whitfield, who had barely spoken to anyone other than staff members in recent weeks, was engaged in an animated discussion with Catherine about children's literature. Albert Morrison, who often spent his afternoons dozing in his chair, was wide awake and entertaining William with stories about the characters he had encountered during his railway career. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the garden when Catherine noticed that several residents were beginning to show signs of fatigue. She mentioned this quietly to William, and they both realized that while they could have stayed much longer, it would be considerate to begin thinking about their departure. But as they prepared to say their goodbyes, something unexpected happened. Rose Patterson, the former nurse, asked if she might have a private word with Catherine. They moved to a quiet corner of the lounge, where Rose took Catherine's hand in her own weathered fingers. "Your Highness," Rose said, her voice gentle but serious. "I want to thank you for today, but more than that, I want to tell you something important. In all my years of caring for people, I've learned that the greatest gift you can give someone is your genuine attention. Not your pity, not your charity, but your real, honest interest in who they are as a person." Catherine felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as Rose continued. "What you and your husband have done today, the way you've listened to our stories and treated us like real people rather than just elderly residents in a care home, that's a gift that most of us haven't received in a very long time. You've reminded us that we still matter, that our experiences and our lives have value." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Rose sharing insights about aging, dignity, and the importance of human connection that would stay with Catherine for years to come. Meanwhile, William was having a similar conversation with Albert Morrison, who was expressing his gratitude in his own straightforward way. "You could have spent this day anywhere, Your Highness," Albert said, gripping William's hand firmly. "Meeting with important people, attending fancy events. But you chose to spend it with us, listening to old stories and eating cafeteria food. That means more than you might realize." As William and Catherine finally prepared to leave, the residents gathered once again in the main lounge. There were no formal speeches or presentations, just heartfelt thanks and promises to return when possible. Several residents had small gifts they wanted to present: handmade items from craft sessions, flowers from the garden, photographs of their families they wanted to share. Mrs. Thompson accompanied them to the entrance, her own emotions clearly running high. "Your Highnesses," she said, "I've been working in elderly care for more than 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened here today. You've given our residents something precious, something that no amount of medical care or comfortable facilities can provide. You've given them dignity and recognition and genuine human connection." As they drove away from Meadowbrook Care Home, William and Catherine sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. Both of them were processing what had just occurred, trying to understand why this particular visit had felt so different from their usual royal engagements. "That was extraordinary," Catherine finally said, her voice soft with emotion. "Did you see how they came alive? how they shared stories they probably hadn't told in years. William nodded, still thinking about his conversations with Albert and Harold and the other gentlemen he had met. They have so much wisdom, so much life experience, and yet they spend most of their days feeling invisible, forgotten. The couple began to discuss what they had learned during their afternoon at the care home. They talked about the residents' stories, their insights, their obvious hunger for meaningful human connection. They also reflected on their own experience, how energizing it had felt to engage in genuine, unscripted conversations without the pressure of formal protocols or media coverage. By the time they returned to Kensington Palace, both William and Catherine knew that this visit had been the beginning of something important. They had discovered a way to use their position and their influence that felt authentic and meaningful, that created genuine value for others while also satisfying their own desire to make a real difference in people's lives. That evening, as they tucked their children into bed, both Prince George and Princess Charlotte asked about their parents' day. Catherine found herself sharing some of the stories she had heard, talking about Rose's nursing career and Dorothy's wedding dresses, while William told them about Albert's railway adventures and Arthur's gardening wisdom. "Why did you visit them, Mama?" Charlotte asked, her young face serious and curious. Catherine thought carefully about how to answer. "Because everyone has important stories to tell, sweetheart, and sometimes people need to know that others are interested in hearing those stories." Later that evening, William and Catherine sat together in their private sitting room, both of them still energized by the day's experiences. They discussed the possibility of making such visits a regular part of their royal duties, finding ways to connect with people across the country in similarly meaningful ways. "We should document this somehow," William suggested. "Not for publicity, but for ourselves. To remember what we learned today, to help us plan future visits." Catherine agreed, and they spent the next hour making notes about their conversations, the insights they had gained, and ideas for future informal engagements. They talked about visiting children's hospitals, community centers, schools, and other locations where their presence might make a genuine difference. What they didn't know as they planned and reflected that evening was that word of their visit was already beginning to spread. Mrs. Thompson had mentioned the visit to her supervisor, who had shared it with the care home's board of directors. Several residents had called family members to share their excitement about the day, and those family members had told friends and colleagues. By the next morning, rumors of the informal royal visit were circulating through Windsor and the surrounding areas. But these weren't negative rumors or gossip about protocol violations. Instead, people were talking about how wonderful it was that the prince and princess had chosen to spend their time in such a meaningful way, how much the visit had meant to the elderly residents, and how refreshing it was to see the royal family engaging with ordinary citizens in such an authentic manner. The palace press office began receiving inquiries from local media outlets, but William and Catherine decided not to issue any official statements about the visit. They wanted to preserve the private, personal nature of what had occurred, and they worried that too much publicity might compromise their ability to make similar visits in the future. However, they also recognized that their experience at Meadowbrook Care Home had the potential to inspire others. Perhaps other members of the royal family, or celebrities, or simply ordinary citizens with time to spare, might be encouraged to visit care homes in their own communities. Perhaps the story of their afternoon with Albert and Rose and the others might remind people of the value and wisdom of elderly citizens who too often felt forgotten and overlooked. As they prepared for bed that night, both William and Catherine felt a sense of satisfaction and purpose that had been missing from many of their official engagements. They had spent a day making a real difference in the lives of real people, and in doing so, they had discovered something important about themselves and their roles as members of the royal family. The visit to Meadowbrook Care Home had been intended as a simple, informal engagement, a way to connect with citizens without the usual fanfare and protocol. But it had become something much more significant. the beginning of a new approach to royal service that prioritized genuine human connection over formal ceremony, meaningful engagement over photo opportunities. Neither William nor Catherine could have predicted, as they drifted off to sleep that night, how profoundly this single afternoon would influence their future work and how deeply it would resonate with people across the United Kingdom and beyond. They had set out to bring comfort and joy to a group of elderly residents, and in the process, they had discovered a new way to fulfill their royal duties that felt both authentic and deeply rewarding. The quiet moment that had begun at Meadowbrook Care Home was already beginning to ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring conversations that would continue to grow in the days and weeks to come. 3 weeks after the visit to Meadowbrook Care Home, the ripple effects of that quiet afternoon were becoming increasingly apparent across the local community and beyond. Mrs. Sarah Thompson had noticed remarkable changes in many of her residents, changes that extended far beyond the initial excitement of meeting royalty. Albert Morrison had begun sharing more stories during group activities, his voice stronger and his eyes brighter than they had been in months. Margaret Whitfield had started a weekly storytelling session, regaling other residents with tales from her teaching days that captivated even the most withdrawn members of their community. The transformation was so significant that Mrs. Thompson felt compelled to document what she was observing. She began keeping detailed notes about the residents' behavior, their engagement levels, and their overall well-being. What she discovered was that the royal visit had acted as a catalyst for something much larger than a single day of excitement. The genuine attention and respect that William and Catherine had shown had reminded the residents of their own worth and dignity, sparking a renewed interest in life and connection that was proving to be remarkably sustainable. Rose Patterson, the former nurse who had spoken so movingly to Catherine about the importance of genuine attention, had become something of an unofficial leader among the residents. She had begun organizing discussion groups where people could share their life experiences and professional expertise with one another. Her background in healthcare made her particularly skilled at recognizing when someone was struggling emotionally, and she had developed an informal support network that was providing comfort and companionship to residents who had previously felt isolated. Word of these positive changes had reached the ears of other care home administrators in the region, many of whom were struggling with similar issues of resident isolation and declining engagement. Mrs. Thompson found herself fielding calls from colleagues who were curious about what had happened at Meadowbrook and whether the improvements they were hearing about were genuine. During one such conversation with the director of a facility in nearby Ascot, Mrs. Thompson found herself describing not just the day of the royal visit, but the weeks of positive changes that had followed. "It's remarkable," she explained. "We've seen residents who hadn't spoken meaningfully to anyone in months suddenly becoming animated and engaged. People who had seemed to lose interest in life are now participating in activities and forming new friendships." The director in Ascot listened intently before asking, "Do you think it was just the excitement of meeting famous people, or was there something more to it?" Mrs. Thompson considered the question carefully. "I think it was the way they were treated," she said finally. "The prince and princess didn't come here to perform some charitable duty or fulfill an obligation. They came as human beings genuinely interested in getting to know other human beings. They listened to our residents' stories as if those stories mattered, as if these elderly people were still valuable members of society with important things to say." Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, William and Catherine were experiencing their own form of transformation. The success of their visit to Meadowbrook had energized both of them in ways they hadn't anticipated, and they found themselves eagerly planning their next informal engagement. They had been in contact with Mrs. Thompson, who had shared updates about the residents and invited them to return whenever they wished. But the couple was also thinking more broadly about how they might expand this approach to their royal duties. They had spent several evenings discussing other types of institutions and communities that might benefit from similar visits. Children's hospitals were an obvious choice, as were community centers in underserved areas, schools facing particular challenges, and shelters for homeless individuals. Catherine had been particularly moved by her conversation with Rose Patterson and was eager to visit other healthcare facilities where they might spend time with patients and staff members. Her interest in early childhood development and mental health had already led to various formal engagements, but she was beginning to see how informal visits might allow for deeper, more meaningful connections. William, inspired by his conversations with the elderly gentleman at Meadowbrook, was interested in exploring visits to veterans organizations and community groups focused on older adults. His military background had given him a deep respect for service members, and he was eager to find ways to honor and support veterans who might be struggling with issues related to aging, isolation, or post-service adjustment. Their private secretary had been working diligently to identify potential venues for future informal visits, but the process was proving more complex than any of them had initially anticipated. The success of the Meadowbrook visit had generated quiet interest from various organizations and communities, but the palace staff was being careful to maintain the low-key, spontaneous nature that had made the original visit so successful. Security considerations remained a significant factor in planning any royal engagements, even informal ones. The protection officers who accompanied William and Catherine had been impressed by how smoothly the care home visit had proceeded, but they were also aware that each new location would present its own unique challenges. Schools, hospitals, and community centers all had different security requirements and operational considerations that would need to be carefully evaluated. Despite these logistical challenges, the couple was determined to move forward with their plans. They had experienced firsthand the power of authentic human connection and were committed to finding ways to make such interactions a regular part of their royal service. The second informal visit they arranged was to St. Mary's Children's Hospital in Paddington, a facility that specialized in treating young patients with serious medical conditions. The hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Michael Harrison, had been contacted by the palace with a request similar to the one that had been made to Mrs. Thompson. Would it be possible for the Prince and Princess of Wales to visit informally, without media coverage, to spend time with patients and their families? Dr. Harrison had immediately recognized the potential value of such a visit. The hospital treated children with cancer, rare genetic disorders, and other serious conditions that required extended stays and intensive treatment. Many of the families were dealing with enormous emotional and financial stress, and the children themselves often struggled with fear, pain, and isolation from their normal lives. However, arranging an informal royal visit to a hospital presented unique challenges that hadn't existed at the care home. Patient confidentiality was a primary concern, as was the need to avoid disrupting medical treatments and procedures. The hospital would need to identify families who were willing to meet with the royal visitors and ensure that such interactions wouldn't interfere with the children's medical care. Dr. Harrison worked closely with the hospital's child life specialists and social workers to develop a plan that would maximize the potential benefits while minimizing any disruptions. They identified a group of families whose children were stable enough to enjoy visitors and whose treatment schedules would allow for flexible timing. One of the families that agreed to participate was the Johnsons, whose 8-year-old daughter Emma was receiving treatment for leukemia. Emma had been in the hospital for 6 weeks and was responding well to treatment, but the long separation from her normal life was taking an emotional toll on both her and her parents. Emma's mother, Lisa Johnson, had initially been skeptical when the hospital staff mentioned the possibility of a royal visit. "Emma's been through so much already," she had said. "I don't want her to get overwhelmed or excited about something that might not happen." But when the hospital assured her that the visit was definitely planned and explained the informal, low-key nature of what was proposed, Lisa began to see the potential benefits. Emma had always been fascinated by princess stories and had followed news about the royal family with the kind of intense interest that only children could maintain. Another family that was included in the planning was the Patels, whose 12-year-old son Arjun was recovering from surgery to treat a rare heart condition. Arjun was an articulate, intelligent boy who had been struggling with the restrictions imposed by his medical condition and the uncertainty about his long-term prognosis. His parents, Dev and Priya Patel, thought that meeting with Prince William, who was known for his interest in mental health and young people, might provide some encouragement and perspective for their son. As the day of the hospital visit approached, the same careful preparations that had characterized the Meadowbrook visit were put in place. Security arrangements were made that would allow for maximum flexibility while ensuring everyone's safety. The hospital staff prepared the families and children who would be involved, but they were careful to maintain the casual, spontaneous atmosphere that had made the care home visit so successful. On the morning of the visit, William and Catherine arrived at St. Mary's Children's Hospital dressed in comfortable, casual clothing that wouldn't intimidate young patients or make them feel as if they were meeting unapproachable celebrities. Catherine wore a simple sweater and jeans, while William chose khakis and a polo shirt that made him look more like a friendly uncle than a future king. Dr. Harrison met them at a staff entrance to avoid any attention from visitors or media who might have been in the main lobby. As they walked through the hospital corridors, both William and Catherine were struck by the unique atmosphere of a children's medical facility. The walls were decorated with colorful artwork and cheerful murals, but the underlying reality of serious illness and family stress was evident in the worried faces of parents and the medical equipment that was visible in many rooms. Their first stop was Emma Johnson's room, where they found the 8-year-old girl sitting up in bed, working on a puzzle with her mother. Emma looked up as they entered, her eyes widening as she recognized the visitors she had been told to expect, but hadn't quite believed would actually appear. "Hello, Emma," Catherine said, her voice gentle and warm. "I'm Catherine, and this is William. We heard you were spending some time here at the hospital, and we wondered if we might visit with you for a little while." Emma nodded shyly, but her excitement was evident in her bright eyes and the way she straightened up in bed. Lisa Johnson stood to greet the royal visitors, her own nervousness apparent, but quickly eased by their casual, friendly demeanor. "Thank you for coming," Lisa said. "Emma's been looking forward to meeting you. She's been practicing her curtsy, even though I told her it wasn't necessary." Catherine laughed and moved closer to Emma's bed. "Curtsies are very nice, but they're definitely not required for hospital visits. May I see what you're working on?" Emma eagerly showed Catherine her puzzle, which depicted a scene from a fairy tale with a castle and various magical creatures. As they worked on the puzzle together, Emma began to open up, sharing details about her treatment, her feelings about being in the hospital, and her hopes for returning to school soon. William engaged Lisa in conversation about how the family was coping with Emma's illness and treatment. He listened carefully as she described the challenges of maintaining normal routines for Emma's younger brother while spending long days at the hospital, the financial strain of medical expenses and missed work, and the emotional roller coaster of dealing with a child's serious illness. "It's remarkable how strong children can be," William observed, watching as Emma explained puzzle strategies to Catherine with the seriousness of an expert. "They often handle these situations with more grace than adults do." Lisa nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "She's been incredible through all of this. Some days I think she's taking care of me more than I'm taking care of her." The visit with the Johnson family extended for nearly an hour, with Emma gradually becoming more animated and confident as she shared her experiences and interests. Catherine learned about Emma's favorite books and movies, her best friends at school, and her dreams of becoming a veterinarian when she grew up. William discussed sports with Emma, discovering that she was an enthusiastic football fan who supported Chelsea and had strong opinions about team strategy. By the time they prepared to move on to visit other families, Emma had transformed from a shy, withdrawn patient into an engaged, spirited child who was laughing and telling jokes. The change in her demeanor was so dramatic that Lisa found herself fighting back tears of relief and gratitude. "This is the most like herself that Emma's been since we've been here," Lisa told Catherine as they prepared to leave. "You've given her back some of her sparkle." Their next visit was with Arjun Patel, whom they found in a common area working on homework with his father's help. Arjun was a serious, thoughtful boy who had been dealing with his heart condition for most of his life. Despite his young age, he had a mature understanding of his medical situation and was actively involved in discussions about his treatment and recovery. William was immediately impressed by Arjun's intelligence and maturity. "I understand you're interested in engineering," he said, taking a seat across from the boy. "What kind of engineering appeals to you most?" Arjun's face lit up as he began discussing his fascination with biomedical engineering and his hope to someday design better medical devices for children with heart conditions like his own. "I want to create machines that can help kids, but don't make them feel like they're broken," he explained. "The equipment here works really well, but it can be scary for younger children." Catherine was struck by Arjun's empathy and his desire to use his own difficult experiences to help others. She asked him about his ideas for making medical equipment more child-friendly and was amazed by the thoughtful solutions he had already begun to develop. Dev and Priya Patel watched with growing amazement as their son engaged with the royal visitors in ways they hadn't seen him interact with many adults. Arjun, who often became withdrawn and anxious when discussing his medical condition, was speaking confidently and enthusiastically about his interests and goals. He hasn't talked this much about his future plans since before his surgery, Priya whispered to Catherine during a moment when William and Arjun were deeply engaged in a discussion about cardiac procedures. Usually he gets overwhelmed when adults ask him about what he wants to do when he grows up. The visit with the Patel family was followed by stops in several other rooms, where William and Catherine met children dealing with various medical challenges. They spent time with a teenage girl who was recovering from brain surgery, playing card games, and listening to her stories about her hopes to become a musician. They visited with a young boy who was undergoing treatment for a rare genetic disorder, marveling at his extensive knowledge of dinosaurs and his ambition to become a paleontologist. Each interaction was unique, but common themes began to emerge. The children were eager to be treated as normal young people rather than as patients defined by their illnesses. They wanted to talk about their interests, their dreams, and their lives beyond the hospital walls. Most importantly, they responded positively to adults who treated them with genuine respect and interest, who listened to their ideas and took their concerns seriously. The hospital staff observed these interactions with growing amazement. Child life specialists who had worked with these families for weeks noted how the children's moods and engagement levels improved dramatically during and after the royal visits. Parents who had been struggling with stress and anxiety found themselves laughing and smiling as they watched their children interact confidently with their famous visitors. Dr. Harrison accompanied William and Catherine throughout their time in the hospital, providing medical context when appropriate, but mainly observing the remarkable transformations he was witnessing. As a pediatric physician with more than 20 years of experience, he had seen many celebrity visits and charitable events, but he had never observed anything quite like what was happening during this informal royal visit. "The difference is that they're not here to be seen," he explained later to a colleague. "They're not here to fulfill some public relations objective or to generate positive media coverage. They're here because they genuinely care about these children and families, and that authenticity comes through in every interaction." The visit to St. Mary's Children's Hospital extended well beyond the originally planned time frame, just as the Meadowbrook Care Home visit had done. William and Catherine found themselves reluctant to leave as long as there were children and families who wanted to meet with them. They spent time in the hospital's family lounge, chatting with parents who were dealing with the stress of having seriously ill children. They visited the hospital's school program, where children who were able to attend classes despite their medical treatments were working on various educational projects. One of the most moving moments of the day occurred when they encountered Sarah Mitchell, a 17-year-old girl who was receiving treatment for bone cancer. Sarah was an aspiring artist who had been using her time in the hospital to work on a series of paintings that depicted her experience as a young cancer patient. Catherine was immediately drawn to Sarah's artwork, which combined beautiful technique with profound emotional depth. The paintings showed scenes from hospital life, but they also captured moments of hope, friendship, and personal growth that Sarah had discovered during her treatment. "These are absolutely beautiful," Catherine said, studying a painting that showed a group of young patients supporting each other through treatment. "You have remarkable talent, and your perspective on this experience is so insightful." Sarah blushed with pleasure at the praise, but she also used the opportunity to share her observations about the needs of young people dealing with serious illnesses. "Adults sometimes forget that we're still teenagers. Even when we're sick," she explained. "We still care about our friends and our futures and normal teenage things. Sometimes the medical stuff becomes so overwhelming that everyone forgets we're still regular people." William was struck by Sarah's maturity and insight. "What would you want adults to understand better about young people in your situation?" he asked. Sarah thought carefully before responding. "That we're still capable of making decisions about our own lives, that we still have dreams and goals that extend beyond just getting better, and that sometimes we need to talk about normal things instead of always focusing on our medical conditions." The conversation with Sarah continued for more than 30 minutes, covering topics ranging from art and creativity to the challenges of maintaining friendships and academic goals while dealing with serious illness. Both William and Catherine were impressed by her wisdom and resilience, and they encouraged her to continue developing her artistic talents regardless of what challenges she might face in the future. As they finally prepared to leave St. Mary's Children's Hospital, William and Catherine were approached by several of the families they had met earlier in the day. The Johnsons wanted to thank them for the dramatic improvement they had seen in Emma's mood and engagement. The Patels expressed gratitude for the encouragement and validation that Arjun had received. But perhaps the most meaningful feedback came from Sarah Mitchell, who handed Catherine a small sketch she had made during their conversation. The drawing showed two adults sitting with a young person, all three figures leaning forward in animated conversation. Below the sketch, Sarah had written, "Sometimes the best medicine is being treated like a real person." Dr. Harrison accompanied William and Catherine as they departed through the same staff entrance where they had arrived several hours earlier. As they walked through the corridors, he shared his observations about the day and its impact on the children and families they had visited. "What you've accomplished here today goes far beyond entertainment or distraction," he said. "You've given these young people something that's often missing from their medical experience, the sense that they're still valued as individuals with important things to contribute to the world." The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, with both William and Catherine processing what they had experienced during their time in the hospital. The interactions with Emma, Arjun, Sarah, and the other young patients had been deeply moving, but they had also been energizing in ways that neither of them had fully anticipated. "Those children are remarkable," Catherine said finally. "Their strength and resilience in the face of such challenging circumstances is truly inspiring." William nodded, thinking particularly about his conversations with Arjun and Sarah. They have such clear perspectives on life and such thoughtful insights about their experiences. It's humbling to spend time with young people who are dealing with such serious challenges, but who remain so hopeful and determined. As they approached the palace, both of them were already thinking about their next informal visit and the other communities they might be able to serve in similar ways. The success of their hospital visit, following so closely after the positive experience at Meadowbrook Care Home, had convinced them that this approach to royal service had the potential to make a genuine difference in people's lives. That evening, as they shared dinner with their own children, William and Catherine found themselves talking about the young patients they had met and the lessons they had learned. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis listened with interest as their parents described Emma's puzzle expertise, Arjun's engineering ambitions, and Sarah's beautiful artwork. "Why were they in the hospital, Papa?" Charlotte asked, her young face serious with concern. William considered how to explain serious childhood illness in terms that his daughter could understand. "Sometimes children get very sick and need special medicine and care that can only be provided in hospitals, he said. But even when they're sick, they're still curious and creative and interested in the world around them, just like you are. The conversation with their children helped William and Catherine reflect on what they had learned during their hospital visit. They had been reminded of the importance of treating young people with respect and genuine interest, regardless of their circumstances. They had seen firsthand how powerful it could be when adults took children's ideas and concerns seriously. Most importantly, they had discovered that their presence and attention could provide comfort and encouragement that extended far beyond the duration of their visit. Just as the residents at Meadowbrook Care Home had continued to benefit from their interaction weeks after the initial visit, the children and families at St. Mary's Hospital would carry the memory of being treated as valuable, interesting people worthy of time and attention from prominent members of society. As they prepared for bed that night, both William and Catherine felt a growing sense of purpose and direction in their royal roles. They had found a way to use their position and influence that felt authentic and meaningful, that created genuine value for others while also satisfying their own desire to make a real difference in people's lives. The quiet moments they had shared at Meadowbrook Care Home and St. Mary's Children's Hospital were beginning to form a pattern, a new approach to royal service that prioritized human connection over formal ceremony. Neither of them could have predicted how profoundly these experiences would influence their future work or how deeply they would resonate with people across the United Kingdom and beyond. But they were beginning to understand that the ripple effects of genuine human connection could extend far beyond the immediate interactions, creating positive changes that would continue to grow and spread in ways they were only just beginning to comprehend. 2 months had passed since William and Catherine's visits to Meadowbrook Care Home and St. Mary's Children's Hospital, and the quiet revolution they had begun was starting to gain momentum in unexpected ways. Word of their informal, genuine approach to royal engagements had begun to spread through various communities, not through official announcements or media coverage, but through the kind of authentic word-of-mouth communication that occurs when people are genuinely moved by something they have witnessed or experienced. Mrs. Sarah Thompson at Meadowbrook had started receiving calls from other care home administrators who had heard about the remarkable improvements in her residents' well-being and wanted to understand what had caused such positive changes. Dr. Michael Harrison at St. Mary's Children's Hospital found himself in similar conversations with colleagues from other medical facilities, describing the lasting impact that a few hours of genuine human connection had made on young patients and their families. But perhaps most significantly, the story of these visits had reached the attention of other members of the royal family and prominent figures in British society who were beginning to recognize the potential for this type of authentic engagement. Princess, and known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties and her deep commitment to practical service, had quietly approached William and Catherine to learn more about their experiences and to discuss how similar principles might be applied more broadly across the royal family's work. During a private conversation at Buckingham Palace, Princess listened intently as Catherine described the transformation she had observed in the elderly residents at Meadowbrook and the young patients at St. Mary's. "What strikes me about what you've done," and said, "is that you've rediscovered something that was always supposed to be at the heart of royal service, but had somehow gotten lost in all the protocol and ceremony." William nodded, appreciating his aunt's direct perspective. "We realized that we were spending so much time attending events and fulfilling official obligations that we had lost sight of the actual people we were supposed to be serving. These informal visits have reminded us that individual human connections are often more valuable than grand gestures or formal ceremonies." Princess Anne's interest in their approach was particularly significant because of her reputation for focusing on substance over style in her royal duties. She had spent decades quietly visiting organizations and communities across the United Kingdom, often with minimal media attention, building relationships and providing support where it was most needed. Her endorsement of William and Catherine's new approach carried considerable weight within royal circles. "I'd like to try something similar with some of the military organizations I support," she said. "I think there are veterans and serving personnel who would benefit from the kind of authentic engagement you've been providing." The conversation with Princess and led to discussions with other members of the royal family about how they might incorporate similar principles into their own work. The Earl and Countess of Wessex expressed interest in applying this approach to their engagements with young people and families. The Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, who had long been involved with various charitable organizations, began exploring ways to make their interactions more personal and meaningful. But the influence of William and Catherine's informal visits was extending beyond the royal family itself. Organizations across the country were beginning to recognize the value of the authentic, personal approach they had demonstrated, and many were working to incorporate similar principles into their own community outreach efforts. The third informal visit that William and Catherine arranged was to Hillside Community Center in Birmingham, a facility that served one of the most economically disadvantaged areas in the city. The center provided after-school programs for children, job training for adults, meals for families in need, and various social services for community members facing difficult circumstances. The center's director, Marcus Williams, was a former social worker who had grown up in the neighborhood and had returned after university to help address the challenges facing his community. When he received the call from the palace asking about the possibility of an informal royal visit, his first instinct was skepticism. "I'll be honest," he told his assistant, "I've seen plenty of politicians and celebrities come through here for photo opportunities, make a few promises, and then disappear forever. The last thing our community needs is more empty gestures from people who don't understand what life is actually like here." But when the palace representative explained the nature of the visits to the care home and hospital, emphasizing the informal, genuine approach that William and Catherine preferred, Marcus began to reconsider. He had heard about these other visits through professional networks and had been impressed by the reported outcomes. Perhaps this really would be different. Marcus decided to proceed with cautious optimism. He worked with his staff to identify community members who might be interested in meeting with the royal visitors, but he was careful to emphasize that participation was entirely voluntary and that there would be no pressure to participate in any formal activities or presentations. The day before the planned visit, Marcus held a meeting with the staff and volunteers who would be present during the royal visit. "I want to be very clear about something," he said. "If this turns into a typical VIP tour where we show off our best programs and pretend everything is perfect here, then we're wasting everyone's time. These people say they want to understand our community and connect with real people facing real challenges. If that's true, then we need to be honest about what life is actually like for the families we serve." The staff members nodded in agreement. They had all experienced visits from officials and dignitaries who seemed more interested in positive publicity than in understanding the actual needs of the community. They were prepared to give William and Catherine the benefit of the doubt, but they were also ready to evaluate whether their actions matched their stated intentions. On the morning of the visit, William and Catherine arrived at Hillside Community Center in the same understated manner that had characterized their previous informal engagements. They wore casual clothing appropriate for a community center environment and arrived without the usual entourage of officials and security personnel that typically accompanied royal visits. Marcus met them at the entrance, his own nervousness barely concealed beneath his professional demeanor. But within minutes of beginning their conversation, he found himself relaxing as it became clear that William and Catherine were genuinely interested in learning about the community and the center's work rather than simply fulfilling another royal obligation. "Tell us about the neighborhood," Catherine said as Marcus led them through the center's main facility. "What are the biggest challenges that families here are facing, and how does the center try to address those needs?" Marcus appreciated the directness of the question. "Unemployment is probably our biggest issue," he said. "Many of the adults in this community have been out of work for months or even years. When people can't find jobs, everything else becomes more difficult. Housing, food security, children's education, mental health, unemployment touches every aspect of family life. William asked follow-up questions that demonstrated he was listening carefully and trying to understand the complex interconnections between the various challenges facing the community. What kind of job training programs have been most effective, he asked, and what barriers do people face in accessing those opportunities? As they toured the facility, William and Catherine met with various staff members and community participants who were engaged in different programs. In the computer lab, they spent time with Janet Morrison, a 42-year-old single mother who was learning digital skills to improve her employment prospects. Janet had initially been hesitant to meet with the royal visitors, worried that she would feel uncomfortable or out of place. But as Catherine sat down beside her at a computer terminal and asked about the program she was completing, Janet found herself opening up about her experiences and goals. "I worked in retail for 15 years, Janet explained, but most of those jobs have disappeared or become part-time positions without benefits. I'm learning about office software and internet research because those skills seem to be required for almost everything now." Catherine listened intently, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated her genuine interest in Janet's situation. "How are you balancing the training program with caring for your children?" she asked. Janet smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun. "It's not easy. My mom helps with childcare when she can, and the center here provides after-school programs for my youngest. But there are definitely days when I wonder if I'm too old to be starting over with a completely different career. What keeps you motivated on those difficult days?" William asked, having moved closer to join the conversation. Janet thought carefully before responding. "My kids, mostly. I want them to see that you don't give up when things get hard, that you keep working to improve your situation even when it seems impossible. And I want to be able to provide them with better opportunities than I had when I was growing up." The conversation with Janet continued for nearly 20 minutes, covering topics ranging from the practical challenges of single parenthood to her dreams for her children's futures. By the end of their interaction, Janet was laughing and sharing stories about her children's school achievements and her own discoveries about her capabilities and interests. Marcus watched this interaction with growing amazement. He had seen Janet struggle with confidence issues throughout her participation in the training program, often doubting her ability to master new skills or compete for jobs with younger, more educated candidates. But during her conversation with William and Catherine, she had spoken with assurance and pride about her goals and accomplishments. In the center's youth program area, William and Catherine met with a group of teenagers who were participating in an after-school mentoring program designed to help them develop leadership skills and explore career opportunities. The group included Jamal Thompson, a 16-year-old aspiring musician who had been struggling with the decision of whether to focus on his artistic interests or pursue more traditionally stable career paths. Jamal had initially been skeptical about meeting with members of the royal family, assuming they would have little understanding of or interest in the realities of his life as a black teenager from a low-income neighborhood. But when William asked him about his music and genuinely listened to his explanations of different musical styles and his own creative process, Jamal began to share more about his experiences and aspirations. "The thing is," Jamal explained, "everyone tells me I should have a backup plan, that music isn't realistic for someone like me. But I don't understand why I should give up on something I'm good at and passionate about just because it's difficult or uncertain." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Those are valid concerns from people who care about your future security," she said. "But it's also important to recognize and develop your talents. Are there ways you might be able to pursue music while also developing other skills that could support you?" The conversation that followed was nuanced and thoughtful, with William and Catherine asking questions that helped Jamal explore different possibilities for combining his artistic interests with practical career planning. They discussed the music industry, the importance of business skills for creative professionals, and the value of education in providing options and opportunities. Marcus observed these interactions with growing respect for the royal visitors. Rather than offering simplistic advice or patronizing encouragement, they were engaging with complex issues in ways that respected the intelligence and agency of the young people they were meeting. They weren't trying to solve problems or provide easy answers, but they were offering genuine interest and thoughtful perspectives that seemed to help people clarify their own thinking. In the community kitchen, where volunteers prepared meals for families facing food insecurity, William and Catherine spent time with Sarah Ahmed, a 63-year-old retired teacher who had started volunteering at the center after her husband's death left her feeling isolated and purposeless. Sarah had been reluctant to participate in the royal visit, feeling that her grief and struggles with depression might make her unsuitable company for such distinguished guests. But as Catherine helped her prepare vegetables for the evening meal service and asked about her teaching career and her adjustment to retirement, Sarah found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she had rarely expressed to anyone. "I taught for 38 years, Sarah said, her voice soft with emotion. "After my husband died, I realized I had no idea who I was when I wasn't teaching or taking care of him. Volunteering here has helped me feel useful again, like I still have something valuable to contribute." William asked thoughtful questions about her teaching experiences and her observations about how education had changed over the decades of her career. Sarah found herself becoming animated as she discussed her former students and the projects and programs she had developed during her teaching years. "You clearly had a profound impact on thousands of young people," Catherine observed. "And it sounds like you're continuing that work here in a different form." Sarah smiled, her eyes brightening for the first time in months. "I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. I'm still helping people learn and grow, just in a different setting." The conversation with Sarah continued as they worked together in the kitchen, and by the end of their interaction, she was sharing stories about her most memorable students and discussing ideas for new volunteer projects she might want to pursue at the center. Throughout their time at Hillside Community Center, William and Catherine participated in various activities and conversations that gave them genuine insight into the challenges and strengths of the community. They sat in on a job interview preparation workshop where they observed adults practicing interviewing skills and offering each other support and encouragement. They visited with children in the after-school program, helping with homework and listening to stories about school experiences and family life. One of the most moving encounters of the day occurred when they met David Richards, a 45-year-old Army veteran who had been struggling with post-traumatic stress and unemployment since leaving military service 3 years earlier. David had been hesitant to participate in the royal visit, worried that his mental health struggles might be inappropriate topics for conversation with members of the royal family. But when William, drawing on his own military experience and his work with veteran support organizations, began asking thoughtful questions about David's service and his transition to civilian life, David found himself opening up about his experiences in ways that surprised him. "The hardest part isn't the memories from deployment," David explained. "It's feeling like you don't have a purpose anymore, like the skills you developed in the military don't translate to anything useful in civilian life." William nodded with understanding. That transition is incredibly difficult, and it's something that isn't well understood by people who haven't served. "What kind of support have you found most helpful?" David appreciated the thoughtful nature of the question. "Honestly, it's mostly been other veterans. People who understand what it's like to go from having a clear mission and defined role to feeling lost in a world that operates completely differently." The conversation continued for more than 30 minutes, with William sharing his own observations about veteran experiences and David describing both his struggles and his gradual progress toward rebuilding a sense of purpose and community connection. By the end of their interaction, David was discussing his interest in using his military experience to mentor other veterans who were facing similar challenges. Marcus observed all of these interactions with growing amazement and respect. He had initially been skeptical about the value of a royal visit to his community center, but he was witnessing genuine connections being formed between William and Catherine and community members who rarely received such thoughtful attention from prominent figures in society. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that this visit was following the same pattern that had characterized the earlier engagements at Meadowbrook Care Home and St. Mary's Children's Hospital. The planned duration was being extended as William and Catherine became increasingly engaged with the people they were meeting and the stories they were hearing. In the center's meeting room, they participated in a community discussion about local needs and priorities, listening as residents described their concerns about housing, transportation, education, and employment opportunities. Rather than offering political responses or making promises about government action, William and Catherine focused on understanding the issues and asking questions that helped community members articulate their own ideas for solutions and improvements. Jamal Thompson, the young musician they had met earlier, spoke passionately about the need for more creative opportunities for young people in the community. Music and art programs get cut first when budgets are tight, he said, but those are often the things that keep kids engaged and help them develop confidence and skills. Catherine asked follow-up questions about what kinds of creative programs would be most beneficial and how such initiatives might be developed and sustained. The discussion that followed involved multiple community members sharing ideas and experiences, with William and Catherine facilitating rather than directing the conversation. Janet Morrison, the single mother who was completing job training, talked about the challenges of accessing reliable childcare and transportation while trying to improve her employment situation. It's a catch-22, she explained. You need a job to afford childcare and reliable transportation, but you need childcare and transportation to get a job. William asked thoughtful questions about potential solutions and listened as community members discussed both the barriers they faced and the creative strategies they had developed to address them. The conversation was pragmatic and solution-focused, with residents sharing resources and ideas with each other while feeling heard and understood by their distinguished visitors. As the official visit time came to an end, William and Catherine found themselves reluctant to leave, just as had happened during their previous informal engagements. The conversations had been so engaging and the connections so genuine that departing felt premature. Marcus approached them as they prepared to say their final goodbyes. I have to admit, he said, I was skeptical about this visit. We've had politicians and celebrities come through here before, and it usually feels like they're just checking a box or looking for a photo opportunity. But what you've done today is completely different. Catherine smiled warmly. What do you mean? You've actually listened to people, Marcus explained. You've asked real questions and shown genuine interest in understanding our community. And I've watched our residents come alive in ways I haven't seen before. Janet was practically glowing after your conversation with her, and David hasn't opened up to anyone the way he did with you today. William nodded thoughtfully. These conversations have been incredibly valuable for us as well. We've learned so much about the challenges and the strengths of this community, and we've been inspired by the resilience and creativity of the people we've met. As they departed from Hillside Community Center, William and Catherine carried with them new insights about urban poverty, community resilience, and the complex factors that influence individual and family well-being. But perhaps more importantly, they left behind a community that felt heard, understood, and valued in ways that would continue to influence relationships and self-perceptions long after the royal visit had ended. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, with both of them processing the conversations they had experienced and the stories they had heard. The visit to Hillside had been different from their previous engagements at the care home and hospital, but it had demonstrated the same potential for authentic human connection to create positive change in people's lives. I keep thinking about Janet, Catherine said as they approached London. The way she lit up when she talked about her goals and her children. You could see her confidence growing throughout our conversation. William nodded, thinking about his interaction with David and the other community members they had met, and Jamal's passion for music, and Sarah's dedication to helping others even while she's dealing with her own grief. Every person we met today had such important stories and perspectives to share. That evening, as they reflected on their day at Hillside Community Center, both William and Catherine were struck by the cumulative impact of their three informal visits. They had spent time with elderly residents in a care home, young patients in a hospital, and community members in an urban neighborhood facing economic challenges. Each environment had been different, but the same themes had emerged consistently. People wanted to be seen and heard as individuals. They had valuable stories and insights to share, and genuine human connection could provide comfort, encouragement, and renewed sense of purpose. The success of these three visits had convinced them that this approach to royal service had the potential to make a significant difference, both for the people they met and for their own understanding of their roles and responsibilities. But they were also beginning to recognize that the impact of their informal engagements was extending beyond the immediate interactions. Marcus Williams had already begun implementing changes at Hillside Community Center based on some of the conversations and observations from the royal visit. The discussion about creative opportunities for young people had inspired him to explore partnerships with local arts organizations. The conversation about veteran support had led to plans for a new peer mentoring program. Similarly, Mrs. Thompson at Meadowbrook Care Home and Dr. Harrison at St. Mary's Children's Hospital had been incorporating lessons from their royal visits into their ongoing work with residents and patients. The emphasis on treating people as individuals with valuable stories and perspectives was influencing staff training and program development at both facilities. But perhaps most significantly, word of these informal royal visits was beginning to inspire others to consider how they might incorporate similar principles into their own community engagement efforts. Other members of the royal family were exploring ways to make their official duties more personal and meaningful. Community organizations were rethinking their approaches to serving vulnerable populations. Even ordinary citizens were being inspired to visit elderly neighbors, volunteer at local facilities, or simply pay more attention to the people around them who might benefit from genuine human connection. As William and Catherine prepared for bed that night, both of them felt a growing sense of purpose and direction in their royal roles. They had discovered a way to use their position and influence that felt authentic and meaningful, that created genuine value for others while also deepening their own understanding of the communities they served. The quiet moments that had begun at Meadowbrook Care Home were growing into something much larger, a movement toward more authentic, compassionate engagement that was touching lives and inspiring change in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. The ripple effects of genuine human connection were spreading far beyond the immediate participants, creating positive changes that would continue to grow and influence communities across the United Kingdom for years to come. 6 months had passed since William and Catherine began their series of informal community visits, and the quiet revolution they had started was now making headlines across the United Kingdom and around the world. What had begun as a simple desire to connect more authentically with the people they serve had evolved into a movement that was transforming not only their own approach to royal duty, but also inspiring fundamental changes in how public service and community engagement were understood and practiced throughout British society. The turning point had come when Rebecca Martinez, a journalist from the Times, heard about the remarkable changes occurring at institutions that had received informal royal visits. Rebecca had initially been investigating reports of improved outcomes at various care homes, hospitals, and community centers, thinking she might be writing a story about innovative social programs or new government initiatives. But as she conducted her research, she kept encountering references to quiet visits from the Prince and Princess of Wales that seemed to be catalyzing positive changes in communities across the country. Rebecca's investigation had led her to interview Mrs. Sarah Thompson from Meadowbrook Care Home, who had been documenting the sustained improvements in her residents' well-being since the royal visit. The data Mrs. Thompson had collected was remarkable. Significant decreases in depression and anxiety among residents, increased participation in social activities, improved relationships between residents and staff members, and even measurable improvements in some residents' physical health indicators. At first, I thought the improvements were just temporary excitement from meeting famous people, Mrs. Thompson had explained to Rebecca. But 6 months later, we're still seeing positive changes that seem to be getting stronger rather than fading away. Something about that visit fundamentally changed how our residents see themselves and their value to the world. Dr. Michael Harrison at St. Mary's Children's Hospital had shared similar observations. Young patients who had met with William and Catherine were showing improved treatment compliance, better emotional regulation, and more positive attitude about their medical care and their futures. Parents reported that their children frequently referenced their conversations with the royal visitors as sources of encouragement and motivation during difficult periods of treatment. The impact goes far beyond what you might expect from a celebrity visit, Dr. Harrison had told Rebecca. These children were treated with genuine respect and interest, and that experience has given them a different sense of their own worth and capabilities. They're approaching their treatment and their lives with more confidence and optimism. Marcus Williams from Hillside Community Center had perhaps the most dramatic results to report. The programs and initiatives that had emerged from conversations during the royal visit had attracted additional funding and volunteer support, leading to expanded services for the community. But more importantly, many of the individuals who had met with William and Catherine had experienced significant personal transformations that were rippling through their families and social networks. Janet Morrison, the single mother who had been completing job training during the royal visit, had not only secured stable employment, but had also become a mentor for other women in similar situations. Jamal Thompson, the aspiring musician, had organized a youth arts program that was providing creative opportunities for young people throughout the neighborhood. David Richards, the Army veteran, had established a peer support network that was helping other veterans navigate the transition to civilian life. It's like they planted seeds, Marcus had explained to Rebecca. The conversations they had with our community members gave people a sense of their own potential and value that has continued to grow and spread to others. As Rebecca compiled her research and began writing her story, she realized that she had uncovered something far more significant than a series of successful royal visits. She was documenting a fundamental shift in how public service could be practiced, a demonstration of the profound impact that genuine human connection could have on individual lives and entire communities. When her article was published titled The Quiet Revolution, How the Wales' Informal Approach to Royal Duty is Transforming Communities, it immediately attracted national and international attention. The story detailed not only the specific visits and their outcomes, but also the broader implications of William and Catherine's approach for public service, community engagement, and social change. The response to the article was overwhelming and largely positive. Mental health professionals praised the emphasis on treating individuals with dignity and respect as a foundation for well-being. Social workers and community organizers expressed enthusiasm about the potential for applying similar principles in their own work. Political leaders from across the spectrum acknowledged the value of the approach while carefully avoiding partisan interpretations of its implications. But perhaps the most significant response came from ordinary citizens across the United Kingdom who were inspired to consider how they might incorporate similar principles into their own lives and communities. Care homes reported increased numbers of volunteer applications from people who wanted to spend time listening to elderly resident stories. Hospitals began receiving offers from community members who wanted to provide companionship and support to patients and families. Community centers and social service organizations found themselves with new volunteers who were motivated by the example of genuine, authentic engagement they had read about in the royal story. The article also attracted international attention, with media outlets and public service organizations in other countries examining how similar approaches might be adapted to their own contexts and systems. Delegations from various nations requested meetings with palace officials to learn more about the planning and implementation of informal engagement strategies. However, The increased attention also brought new challenges and responsibilities that William and Catherine hadn't fully anticipated. The palace press office was inundated with requests from organizations hoping to arrange similar visits, media outlets seeking interviews and additional information, and researchers interested in studying the outcomes and methodologies of the informal engagement approach. William and Catherine found themselves in the unusual position of having accidentally created a movement while trying to simply do their jobs more effectively. They were pleased that their approach was inspiring positive changes in other contexts, but they were also concerned about maintaining the authentic, spontaneous nature that had made their visits so successful. "We never intended for this to become a formal program or a public relations strategy," Catherine explained during a private meeting with senior palace staff. "The whole point was to move away from formal programs and scripted interactions toward genuine human connection. I'm worried that too much attention and analysis might undermine the very qualities that made these visits meaningful." William shared her concerns, but also recognized the potential value of expanding their approach if it could be done thoughtfully. "Perhaps we can find ways to share what we've learned while still preserving the informal, personal nature of our own visits," he suggested. "Maybe the focus should be on inspiring others to develop their own authentic approaches rather than trying to replicate exactly what we've done." After considerable discussion with their advisors, William and Catherine decided to accept a limited number of speaking engagements and interviews where they could discuss the principles behind their informal visits without revealing specific details about individual interactions or creating pressure for other organizations to copy their exact methods. Their first major public discussion of their approach came during a speech at the Royal Society of Medicine, where Catherine addressed an audience of healthcare professionals, social workers, and community service providers. She spoke about the importance of seeing individuals rather than patients, clients, or beneficiaries, and the transformative potential of genuine human connection and healing and growth. "What we've learned through our informal visits," Catherine told the audience, "is that people have an extraordinary capacity for resilience and growth when they feel